All right, guys, I still don't really have a voice, but we're going to try this out. This will be remote learning for Monday, January 27th. Okay, so we're still on chapter 22, the Precambrian Earth. And just a heads up, you can pause this at any time so that you can finish filling in the notes, and then you can unpause to keep moving on with me. So section 4 deals with early life on Earth. Okay, so the origin of life. The origin of life is obviously a big discussion that has lots of different potential answers, but most scientists will agree that the intense meteorite and asteroid bombardment that happened at the beginning of time on Earth prevented life from developing until about 3.9 billion years ago. Okay, we talked about this in the last section, but fossil evidence suggests that the cyanobacteria started to exist about 3.5 billion years ago. Okay, and like I said, where and how life began is an area of active research. Okay, so whenever we look at the early atmosphere of the Earth, scientists think that the early atmosphere had hydrogen, methane. Methane is CH4, carbon and 4 hydrogens. And ammonia is NH3, a nitrogen and 3 hydrogens. Okay, just like today, lightning did happen. And so scientists in 1953 decided to see if they could do an experiment. They called it the Miller-Urey experiment, after the two people who kind of came up with this. And they showed that these gases, okay, hydrogen, methane, and ammonia, along with energy that was provided by the lightning, could develop organic molecules. So they called this the primordial soup. Okay, so what happened here, like we can see in this picture, okay, they have water, and they heated the water up. So the steam would rise up. Okay, they would inject the methane and the ammonia into this closed system. The water, the methane, and the ammonia would cycle through. Okay, there'd be 2 electrodes, and that would provide a jolt of electricity through there. Okay, so we have the water, the methane, the nitrogen, the ammonia and the hydrogen, the spark of electricity, and then all of that would cool down and start to turn into a liquid and gather down here at the bottom. And then they could take the liquid out of that area right there to see what's inside. And again, they could detect some organic molecules inside of there. And organic just means that it's going to be living or potentially living. Okay, so the molecules that formed in this experiment include these things called amino acids. You'll talk about amino acids in your biology class next year. Okay, they're the building blocks of proteins. Proteins are really important because proteins are what your DNA make. And the proteins that your DNA make is what makes everything about you special and different from everybody else. So just a couple of visual examples. If you have brown hair, it's because your DNA makes protein for brown hair. If you have straight hair, your DNA makes protein for straight hair. If you have curly hair, your DNA makes protein for curly hair. Okay, if you have brown eyes, blue eyes, whatever, your DNA makes proteins that make your eyes that color. Same thing with your skin color. And like I said, everything that makes you who you are. Okay, like being able to digest gluten and lactose, that comes from the proteins and the amino acids as well inside of your body. Okay, but we know that amino acids and proteins are not actual living things. So the Miller-Urey experiment created some amino acids, but not enough amino acids to create as much life as the Earth has. Okay, so scientists have to look to other places, okay, to see. Because again, remember the Miller-Urey experiment basically just said that lightning, mixed with the gases that were in the atmosphere already and created these amino acids. So some scientists think that amino acids were formed elsewhere in the universe, not in that picture, and were transported here by asteroids and comets. Okay? And by studies today using the techniques that we talked about in the astronomy section last semester, I can't even think of what it's called right now, or whatever. But the synthesis of amino acids is possible in interstellar clouds. And again, scientists can see that. Life may have also emerged in these deep ocean hydrothermal vents. That's what this picture is showing here. Energy and nutrients necessary for life are present in that environment. Okay, there's a whole bunch of life that lives down in these deep sea hydrothermal vents that scientists didn't even know existed until the late 80s or early 90s, which really wasn't that long ago. And so all of that life most likely developed down there on its own, separate from how life developed at the surface of the earth. It's really interesting to look at if that's something that's interesting to you. All right, so an essential characteristic of life, one of the main points that makes something a living thing, is that it needs to be able to reproduce. Okay, and I'm not saying that every single living thing has to reproduce, but a species has to be able to reproduce. So if you make a personal choice in your life to not have children, that doesn't mean that you're not alive, but human beings as a whole will reproduce. You get your dog spayed or neutered, your dog's not going to be able to reproduce, right? Or your cat. It's not saying that your dog or cat's not alive, but dogs and cats as a species are still able to reproduce. So that's what we're talking about here. Okay, so again, this gets into a lot of biology stuff that you'll talk about next year. But DNA and RNA are what your cells use to reproduce inside of your bodies. Okay, so you get like a cut on your arm, and your skin needs to reproduce to be able to mend that wound. Okay, so in addition to DNA and RNA to give the directions on how to do that, your body needs to have these enzymes that'll help carry out reproduction. All right, an enzyme is just a protein that will make a specific thing happen inside of your body. So, like I said, you'll talk about this way more next year in your biology class. This is going to be about a quarter of what your biology class is next year. I'm talking about all this stuff on this page. But RNA molecules called ribozymes can act as enzymes. So it's RNA and an enzyme kind of mixed together as one thing. So these ribozymes can replicate without the use of these other enzymes. Okay, so your DNA and your RNA normally would need to be its own unit, and then it would need enzymes to help it carry out reproduction. These ribozymes can kind of do the whole thing all at once. So these RNA ribozymes may have been some kind of intermediate molecule between inorganic molecules that don't contain carbon and hydrogen and today's DNA-based organisms. So again, not 100% confirmed, but again, it could potentially be a stepping stone in the right direction. All right, so whenever we're talking about the early Precambrian, unicellular life dominated until the end of the Precambrian. So at the end of the Archean, and then moving forward into the Proterozoic, like it shows right up here. Okay, unicellular organisms are going to be the ones that are the main things. Unicellular organisms, like this right here, are called prokaryotes. Prokaryotes do not contain nuclei. It does not have a nucleus inside of it. Okay, if we zoom in, all right, no nucleus. It's just cytoplasm, some nucleoids, flagella, ribosomes, membrane, cell wall. Okay, if we look over here, this is a eukaryotic cell. This is a more modern cell, like an animal cell, like it shows. It's got the nucleus. It's got all of these. Goodness. Sorry. all of these things inside of it to help make it do what it needs to do. Anyway, so again, those are organisms that do have a nucleus. Those are called eukaryotes. So that's this. Easy way to remember it. You are a eukaryote. Okay, so it sounds similar. But anyway, again, prokaryotic cells are going to be what we're going to be seeing in the Precambrian for the most part. Whoops. All right, so next up we come to Snowball Earth. We saw a little bit about Snowball Earth in the video from Friday. So Snowball Earth is a period of time between 850 and 550 million years ago when glaciers covered the majority of the Earth, like you can see in this picture here. Okay, big portion of the north, big portion of the south covered in glaciers. This would have played a critical role in the extinction of many early eukaryotes. The reason why is because at this point in time, all of the stuff, let's make that a different color, all of the stuff still lives in the ocean, okay? All of the ocean water is being sucked up into these glaciers here. And so the oceans are getting much shallower. So it's just like today you hear about an animal goes extinct because of loss of habitat. So these early eukaryotes would have gone extinct during this Snowball Earth period of time because of loss of habitat, in addition to it being much cooler than it is today, not a hospitable environment for living things. All right, so as Snowball Earth starts to go away and starts warming up, it became much warmer. At that point in time, more multicellular organisms started to appear in the rock record. Okay, so most of these multicellular organisms that you can see right here in this picture were discovered in Australia's, I say it Ediacara, but the video said it a little bit differently. I don't remember exactly how they pronounced it, but I would say this word Ediacara. Or I think the video said Ediacara. Either way. So they're discovered in Australia, and they call them the Ediacaran biota or Ediacaran biota. So that's the name of this group of animals as a whole. So these are basically going to be the fossil evidence that connected single cell organisms to more complex organisms that were found later on into the Phanerozoic eon, which is the modern eon. Okay, so again, in the video, these don't necessarily look like anything that we know of that lives today. All right, but they kind of suggested being similar to worms, or an early version of worms that we might see. This up here is like an early version of a mollusk. A mollusk is going to be something that has like a shell associated with it, like a clam. An octopus is considered a mollusk as well, although it doesn't have a shell. But again, that'll be something you learn about in your biology class. But like I said, these are going to be what ties the Precambrian to the future. Okay, so those Ediacaran fossils have then been discovered all over the world since their first discovery. So although they were discovered here in the first place, the fossils have been found all over the world since then. So these Ediacaran biota, these animals, they flourished between about 600 and 540 million years ago. Then a mass extinction occurred and most of them died out. Not everything died out. The organisms that are related to today's organisms survived to move into the next eon, which again, we'll talk about in chapter 23. It's called the Phanerozoic eon, and it's going to be the modern eon. So next chapter is going to deal a lot more with things that we're more familiar with. All right, guys, I don't have it on here, but let's look for it. Let's look at our core questions. Let me find them real quick. There it is. Okay, three core questions for this section. The experimental evidence showing how life might have begun on Earth summarized. What you're going to want to talk about is the Miller-Urey experiment. Okay, so let's mark this up real quick. All right, so explain the Miller-Urey experiment. What's the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes? That's pretty straightforward. And how are early multicellular organisms described? That's the Ediacaran biota. So talk about that and explain that a little bit more, what that is. All right, guys, you can always message me if you have any questions. Good luck, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday.